10. Their days now followed a routine. Danny and Wayne would get up and have breakfast with Fendar, be joined by Wanderer, and the four of them would ride in a wagon to the palace. The guards, who had never been friendly to them anyway, would grunt and wave them on. A servant would then lead them to wherever the king was holding the audience. After the audience with the king, Fendar would meet some of the Mauritians to discuss their plight. He would then sneak away to be alone. Danny got the impression he went off to pray, sometimes for hours. This morning the king was in a particularly foul mood. Little wonder, since his clothes were falling off his back and his skin was covered with sores. But he remained fiercely stubborn and greeted the four with a terse "No." "No, sire?" Fendar inquired. "Allowing the Mauritians to leave Muric is out of the question. How many times do I have to say it?" "As you wish," Fendar answered, and then he waved Danny forward. "The glory of Palatia will fade before your eyes," he began. "Like you did yesterday," the king interjected. "You disappeared before the eyes of my guard." Danny cleared his throat and continued. "Money, fashion, and beauty are gone. Now watch what happens to your great industries." Wanderer took the walking stick and casually strode over to one of the thick pieces of timber that made up the wall of the reception hall. He tapped the stick against it, and then returned to Fendar's side. "Know that the unseen one is powerful throughout the land of Palatia," Fendar said. Everyone watched and waited to see what Wanderer's simple action would mean. The king, whose hands had been grasping the armrests of his throne, suddenly lifted them up. "What is this?" he gasped, and stared at the wood on the armrests. Namathas came quickly to his side. "Sire?" he asked. "The wood is rotting," the king said, unable to take his eyes off the throne. "Throughout your kingdom," Fendar announced, "the great Palatian trees on which the renowned Palatian lumber trade depends will rot." The palace began to creak like an old ship as the wood started to fulfill Fendar's statement. The timber around them turned from brown to ashen grey. The court buzzed, and the members moved to the door. Fearful that the roof might cave in, Namathas leaned towards the king and whispered in his ear. Danny looked for Michelle. She stood off to the side of the room. She hadn't moved and wouldn't look at him. Her expression, Danny thought, was pensive. Danny was disappointed. He hoped that because she'd helped him at the maze yesterday, she might have a change of heart. Fendar indicated it was time to go. The two men turned with Danny and Wayne ready to follow, when the king suddenly shouted at them to stop. That brought chaos into the room to a standstill. The king nodded to Namathas, who crossed the room to Fendar. "Fendar, you acted before the king had a chance to finish his statement," he said silkily. "Oh?" Fendar said in obvious surprise. "While it is not possible for your Mauritians to leave Muric to worship the unseen one, there is another way." Fendar waited for Namathas to continue. "The king would like to declare a national day of worship for everyone in Palatia. He will grant the Mauritians complete freedom to have a feast in their district with the assistance of the king himself to worship the unseen one here in Muric." This seemed like a reasonable counter-offer, Danny thought, and he wondered if Fendar would accept it. Fendar looked past Namathas and spoke to the king directly. "Sire, your offer seems kind," he said diplomatically, "but it is like asking locked-up prisoners to celebrate their freedom without giving without them leaving their jail cells. You must let my people go free from Uruk to worship according to the one unseen one's commands. King Stephen's face, purple and blotchy as it was, went a deep crimson. He stood as stiff as a board, as if holding his breath and counting to 10 to control his anger, and then he turned away from them all. Michelle stepped forward anxiously. It looked at Danny as if she wanted to say something, but didn't dare, and then, without facing them, the king said, "All right, go where you want. Just put an end to these curses." The members of the court gasped in surprise. Namatha's eyes grew wide. Danny wanted to shout. Wayne even wanted to leap up, but Danny put a restraining hand on his brother's arm. Success at last. Fendar and Wanderer exchanged glances. Neither of them looked satisfied or jubilant. In fact, they looked downright worried, Danny thought. Fendar stepped forward and bowed. "What did your highness say?" he asked. The king spun on his heels and repeated through clenched teeth, "Your Mauritians may go to worship for a few days. End your curses now." Fendar, with no sign of relief, responded, "As you wish." Wanderer held up the walking stick and then brought it down hard on the floor. It crashed with a thunderous sound, and a blinding light made them all shield their eyes, and after a moment the light subsided, and Danny, blinking, looked around. Everyone's skin had turned to normal. Everyone's clothes had changed from rags to the rich-coloured fabrics they had been once before. The crests and banners hung proudly once again, and the timber was brown and firm. The king slumped down on his throne, now rot-free and sturdy again, and stared out a nearby window. Then he moved his hand in a gesture so subtle it was hard even to see he had done it. Namatha saw it, however, and immediately clapped his hands loudly. "The king wishes to be alone. You are dismissed," he ordered. Danny had no doubt that the king felt humiliated. Everyone left the reception hall in silence, and once again Danny tried to catch Michelle's eye, but she was frozen in place and wouldn't look at him. Danny figured she felt humiliated too. Once the reception hall was clear, Namathis closed the doors. He moved wearily to the king. "You surprised me, sire," he said. "When I suggested you give a counter-offer, I had no idea." "What choice did I have?" the king said peevishly. "None, of course," Namathis replied. Stefan looked at Michelle, but she kept her gaze down. "You don't agree?" he guessed. "I'm not allowed to argue with you," Michelle said evasively. "You're the king." "And don't you forget it," Stefan said sternly. "And as the king, I must think of the welfare of my people before my own pride. You are a child, and you cannot possibly understand." "I understand that you gave in." The king sat up and pointed a finger in her direction. "Not that I ever have to explain myself, but I want you to be educated in the ways of leadership. Because Fendar cursed our money, we've been relying on our lumber trades as a mean to barter with other nations. To lose that would ruin us financially. We would be a bankrupt nation. So Fendar has won." "He hasn't won," the king said, a sly smile forming across his lips. "I said they could go, but I didn't say when they could go." Namathis was instantly concerned. "Sire, you don't mean to go back on your promise," he said anxiously. The king shook his head, but the smile stayed. "Oh, I will not go back. I will simply postpone. Michelle giggled and wondered what Danny would say about that.